Hi, I'm Jonathan Warner. I'm a filmmaker here in the UK and I specialise in corporate films. I've been doing this a number of years, many years in fact, and in all that time I've always had a little bit of a problem with colour correction, particularly matching different cameras on the same shoot, specifically skin tones. No matter what I do, whether I make sure the white balance is set correct on every camera, they use the same picture profile, there's always a difference. The skin tones particularly always look different. So I need a way to colour correct, and I like to do things simple if I can. I'm not one really for coming out of my main editing software, which is Premiere, and using a different software to colour correct, in particularly DaVinci Resolve. That is great, I've used it and it's fantastic. I just find it a bit of a fiddle to have to come out the software, do the changes, go back, and if I want to make further changes I've got to go back again and so on. I just find that a bit of a fiddle. Now inside Premiere you've got the Lumetri panel, and it's okay but not great. But recently I've been using Magic Bullet Suite to do my colour correction, and in conjunction with one of these I'm finding it a real winner. Let me show you. Now normally I edit in Premiere across 3 monitors and I spread all the different windows across those 3 monitors, but for this demonstration I'm having to capture this on a single monitor. So I've made a custom workspace which has got the reference monitor here and the program monitor here, and that will allow me to compare different shots, and I'll show you that shortly. So for this test I have set up a test scene, and I've done that across all my different cameras. So if I maximise this window here, I'll show you. So first of all I've got the FS700 and Odyssey 7Q shot in S-Log2, the A7S with a Pix E5H again shot in S-Log2. You'll have to forgive the fact that the exposure levels are different across these cameras. I meant to make them exactly the same but somehow didn't, but I think this is a good test to show how you can match cameras even with different exposure levels. What I did do is make sure that all of them were set to the same white balance. I did a custom white balance at Kelvin 6100. So FS700, A7S, A6500, a 1DX Mark II, a Phantom 4 Pro in D-Log, and finally, just for fun, a Sony Handycam camcorder I've had for some time, a Sony HDR PJ810. And you will have seen across all of those cameras that they all look remarkably different to each other, even though, like I say, all of the white balances were set to the same. And in some cases, even though the picture profile is set the same, they still look different. So I'm going to show you the order I do things in and the reason I do them. The first thing I do is I'm going to use Magic Bullet Colorista, and you'll see why I prefer this shortly. So I'm going to add this, find this in my effects list, and I'm going to drag it across Magic Bullet Colorista over to my first clip, which is the FS700. And the first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to my effects control panel, first thing I'm going to do is to set the white balance in Premiere. Now the reason I'm doing this is even though the white balance has been uniformly set to 6100 and it was all custom white balance using this grey card here, and I held that in front of me here for all of the cameras and they all came out at exactly the same 6100. Even though I've done that, I find between cameras they handle white balance very differently. The whites still look different, so I'm going to make it even more even, hopefully, by doing another white balance within this Colorista. You can also do it in Lumetri, but I'm going to do it in Colorista. So I'm just going to grab this little auto white balance picker here. I'm going to put it on the white card I'm holding in front of me, purely because it's consistent across all the shots. So I'm going to click that there. That's the first thing I'm going to do. The second thing I'm going to do is to balance the exposure levels. And you'll see I've used this X-rite video passport card here. And I'm going to isolate the bottom row, which has the black and the white squares, so that I can hopefully set the exposure level correctly. So I'm going to do that by drawing a mask from my opacity, from the opacity area here in the effects control. I'm just going to put a little point roughly in the right position. I'm going to maximize this window. I'm going to increase the size to 200% temporarily. I'm just going to move that first point to there, draw another point there, another point there, another point there, until it's only that that's left. I'm going to put this back. Now what I'm going to use here is the Lumetri scopes, and this will show me where my levels are. So I just maximize that temporarily. You'll see these are the squares on that X-rite card. These three up here are the white ones, and then these two here are the black ones. So what really should be happening to make a balanced shot in the Rec. 709 color space is to have these black squares closer to the 0 point here, and these white squares closer to the 100. They're actually fairly close already, but I want them to remain up there, and these two blacks to come down here. So to do that, I'm going to first of all lower the shadow level here in the three-way color correction section of Colorista. I'm going to just grab that, I'm going to lower it, and as you'll see, this is coming down as I do so. And I'm going to take it to, I don't go all the way, I leave a little bit of leeway to there. I'm going to grab the highlight one, just take it up a little bit to about there. So I'll just show you that full screen. So I've taken the white ones closer to the 100 and the black ones closer to the 0. Okay, so if now I remove the mask from the opacity section and I maximize this window, you'll see that the blacks are close to being very black and the whites are close to being very white in exposure level. And that's more of a balanced shot. Incidentally, I'm only going to correct and balance these shots for the foreground, and that is me here with this table and what's on it. I'm not going to expose correctly for the background. To do that, you'd have to isolate the background with a mask and do a separate adjustment to try and get that correct, because there's no way I'm going to get a shot that's completely balanced across the entire shot, foreground and background, because of the different levels of lighting. I didn't have enough light to expose the foreground to match this background. So I'm only going to correct and expose for the foreground in this demonstration. And like I say, to do a separate adjustment for the background, you'd have to use a mask, but I won't do that here. So okay, so that's exposure levels. Now I need to try and correct the colors. For example, the FS700 I find is always wrong with colors out the box. So to do that, I'm going to do another mask, and I'm going to isolate the top row of this X-rite card here. So I'm just going to grab the pen tool from the opacity, put a point roughly in position. I'm going to make that full screen. I'm going to increase to 200% so I can see what I'm doing better. And move the point to the corner, grab another point, another one, until we've got a box. Go back. Okay, so now we've only got the color, the top row of the color of the card isolated. And what I want now is, I don't want the waveform, I want the vector scope. So I'm going to turn off the waveform, so I've just got the vector scope. And the good thing is, the top row of this card represents the 6 primary colors that are featured on the vector scope. And the idea is to try and line up those colors to where they should be according to the Rec. 709 color space. I'm just going to maximize this. So you can see there's 6 dots and lines coming out from the center. And what should happen is, this one, for example, is the red. This should be pointing towards this red mark here. And as you can see, it's quite a way over towards the yellow. This should point to the magenta, this should point to the blue, cyan, green and yellow. And they're all slightly out, the yellow being probably the most accurate out of all of them. So to do that, I'm going to come down in the Colorista panel to the HSL wheels. And this is the reason I'm using Colorista as opposed to Lumetri, is because this feature doesn't really exist in Lumetri. It's a lot more difficult to achieve this. So what I want to do is, going back to this vector scope, is to move, for example, the red closer to where it should be. And that means moving the red and adding more magenta to it and taking away some yellow. So to do that, I can grab one of these little dots here, the red one, I hold down the shift key and that stops me adjusting the saturation and brightness level of that color. Purely, I only want to adjust at this stage purely the hue value of it. So I'm going to hold the shift key down, I'm going to drag it towards the magenta point, and I'm going to just move it until I can see that the line is pointing pretty much on red. And actually I've gone as far as this one can go because the magenta point is stopping it. But I think that's pretty good. If I show you that now, it's a lot closer to where it should be, possibly slightly out. This one looks like it's pointing to here, so I need to move the magenta slightly to the right as well. So I'll grab the magenta point, hold the shift key down, just move it a little bit. Gone too far there, go back. Let's just check that again. I need to make it look, probably gone a little bit too far, so let's just take that back a little bit. Try that. A bit more. Okay, that looks pretty good. Blue needs to come towards magenta. Let's try that. Move the blue, shift key. Just have a look at that. Blue, pretty good. I think the magenta just a little bit more. Okay, cyan a little bit towards more green, I think, just a tad. Yep. Green looks about right, yellow looks about right. The saturation level is a bit low. It ought to be closer to this line. I never take it as far towards this line because I find it becomes far too saturated, and actually you can get breakup in the picture when you really push it, particularly with some cameras more than others. So I'm just going to raise the saturation level a little than what it is. I'm just going to grab the saturation here and just drag it out until we come to about there. Now, in an ideal world, I guess all of these colors should be even. But what I do find is that reds particularly, if I start to play with the reds and try to match the saturation level of the others, I find red just breaks up really quickly in the picture, particularly with 8-bit images. So I'm just going to leave that for now. Whether that's the right thing or not, I don't know, but I find that is what I do and it tends to work the best. I'm going to add a little bit more saturation, actually, just a little bit there. I think that's about right. Okay, so they look about right. I'm just going to remove the mask now off that top row of the card. Let's have a look at the picture. The one thing I'm going to check before I move on to the next camera is the skin tone level. And on the vector scope we have a skin tone line, and it's just a guideline really to see if our skins are pretty reasonably accurate in their color level. And this skin tone line is this one here, which goes roughly 50 degrees or so there. So I'm just going to temporarily put a mask around my face, just my face. I'm going to look at the skin tone line, and yeah, I'm happy with that. It's pretty much on the line, so I'm going to leave that. That's absolutely fine. Remove the mask. Okay, so we've now got a really nice saturated and exposed image compared to what we had. If we compare before and after, before, after. Like I say, I'm only correcting and exposing for the foreground. So if we look at our waveform, we are overexposed in certain points, but these refer to the background. These lines here are the foreground, and these are exposed correctly. the background isn't, but I'm not going to worry about that for this demonstration. And also we've got some crushed blacks in part of the background as well. Again, I would have to isolate that, mask it out and adjust, but I'm not going to worry. So I'm going to use this as a reference now. And I want to match the other cameras to this reference. And this is why I've got the reference monitor here, because actually I can choose any point on my timeline and have that as the reference. I'm going to keep the first shot as my reference, and I'm going to move the timeline to the next clip, which is the A7S. And this allows me to compare those two shots, and you can see they are completely different at this moment. So I'm going to repeat the process I did just now with the FS700 clip, and we'll try to balance this shot and match the colors. So first of all, I'm going to grab the Colorista effect, drag it onto the clip. I'm going to do a white balance on this card here. Then I'm going to isolate the bottom row of this X-rite color card. Now the good thing is, I haven't mentioned it up to now, but the good thing about this little X-rite card is that it's so small. So you have to be disciplined, but you can actually carry this around wherever you're filming, even on a run and gun environment, and just hold it in front of the shot very quickly in each space that you go to. So if you're moving from room to room, space to space, just grab a shot with that card, and that allow you to correct afterwards. So I'm going to grab the mask tool from the opacity, and I'm going to just put a point there. I'm going to go to 200% again, just so I can see what I'm doing. Move that point, add another one, add another one, add another one, add another one. Okay, so we don't want the vector scope for this, we just want the waveform, and I'm just going to look at that, and as you can see, they are not in the right place. So these two white points need to come quite a way up to here, and these two black points need to come down to here. So I'm going to adjust the shadows first of all to bring the blacks down to, I usually take it about there, not all the way to the bottom, and then the highlights I'm going to take up to about there, which is roughly how I did it before. That should be fine. I'm going to remove the mask. Okay, so in terms of brightness levels, we're pretty close now between those two shots, but the colors are different, as you can see. So this is where we first of all need to match the colors. So I'm going to do it again as I did before. I'm going to try and do it to the card first. So I'm going to grab the mask tool in the opacity, put a point roughly in position, zoom in, just shift that a little bit, move it to there, add another point. Okay, I want the vector scope, and I'll remove the waveform. So let's have a look at that. Okay, so these levels are a little bit more uniform than the FS700, but again, they're not quite pointing to the right positions. This red one's slightly off, magenta's not too bad, blue's not too bad, cyan is off. So all in all, it's actually better than the FS700 was, but I'm just going to try and make that a bit more accurate. So red, I'll shift a little bit. Again, I come down to the HSL wheels, I grab the red, I hold down the shift key, I'm just going to shift it a bit. That looks right. Cyan needs to have more blue in it, and take it more towards blue. Let's just have a look at that. Magenta, slightly more red, I think. Not a lot. Okay, that looks okay, that looks okay. Green, slightly off. I think we'll take that one towards magenta. Sorry, towards cyan. Have a look at that. Yellow, a little bit more red, I think, just a tiny bit. Too much. There. Okay, I think that looks pretty good. So I'm going to remove the mask. Okay, so what I'm also now going to do is to check the skin tones. We've corrected for the primary colours. Let's just see how the skin tones match. So I'm going to zoom in on my face, unfortunately. And do the same. This is the FS700 on the left. And this is the A7S on the right. I'm going to compare them. Okay, so I think there's a tad more green in the face here than on here. This has got a bit more red in it. So this is where I'm going to go back to the HSL wheel and use the orange point, which is one area I didn't adjust because it's not part of the primary colours. And I'm going to move the orange point closer to the red because I think this needs a little bit more red. So I'm going to grab the orange. I'm just going to move it. Okay, so I think they are pretty well matched. And I'm just going to also, so that's the skin tones, I'm also now going to just check some other parts of the image just to see how they match up. Sometimes I find these colours can be different. I'm just going to check that. This is why it's nice to have a reference monitor. So I think this colour here is too blue, so I'm going to move the cyan one towards the green a little bit until it matches. I also want to remove some of the saturation level just a bit, so I'm going to move it in. I'm going to play with that until it looks about the same. Okay, I think that looks pretty good. Personally, I'm happy with the balance of those two shots. I say they match pretty well towards each other now. So I'm going to leave that, and I'm now going to do exactly the same with all the other cameras. I'm going to fast forward this so that you don't have to sit through it in real time, and we'll come back at the end. Okay, so I've corrected and matched the cameras to each other as best as I can and as close as I can. And if we run through those quickly, you can see the FS700, the A7S, the A6500, the 1DX Mark II. Incidentally, when I recorded with the 1DX Mark II, I somehow did it on HD and not 4K, so there's a mistake. That's why it looks a little fuzzier. The Phantom 4 Pro, and then the Sony HDR PJ10. They look, I think, a lot closer to each other than they did before. They're not perfect, I'll grant you, but they are far closer, and it didn't take me too long. The thing is, that is just a basic colour match as far as I'm concerned. What I haven't done is add any kind of grade, and if I add a grade, and I've got one prepared here in the adjustment layer, it kind of masks any slight differences there were between the cameras. So when you go through the different cameras now, they actually look even closer to each other, I think. Considering they come from 6 completely different cameras, they are fairly close to each other. So hopefully that's giving you a little insight into how I colour correct and match different cameras. I hope you found that useful, and thanks for watching.